Good afternoon. Apparently I've gone live. I'm still working on these new technologies, but I wanted to thank everybody for attending. We've actually got a good attendance today, and I wanted to touch on what has been one of the most topical elements of cloud and hybrid cloud management, in that is around cost management and some of the challenges organizations are facing of controlling their cloud spend. And today, I just wanted to introduce you to the platform, what we've been doing as an Australian-based business to help our customers challenge cloud and go to cloud with greater confidence. And a big part of that is trying to solve some of the budget management and governance frameworks that must come along with us on the journey for this cloud tsunami that we're now engaged with. So I just wanted to give you just a little bit of a background on Buttonwood. A lot of people ask where the name came from. So just very quickly, in 1792, 27 financial brokers came together to sign an agreement. That agreement formed the very first stock exchange, which was very much an industrial revolution and changed the course of financial management over the last 2 decades, or 2 centuries, I should say. So that agreement that they signed was the Buttonwood Agreement. So what we wanted to be able to do was take the bull by the horns and challenge, I guess, ourselves and industry to do things better. So that's where Buttonwood came from. It came from also 12 months worth of customer development. We worked very closely with customers trying to understand the business problem long before we wrote a line of code. And one of the overarching concerns that customers have was, help me understand my spend before I go and help me govern that through life. Don't just tell me what I've already spent and expect me to pay the bill, which unfortunately with many of the customers that we initially engage with is kind of the situation we find them in. And we're very proud to be working with a lot of those agencies to try and control and govern. So today what I wanted to do is very quickly go through the platform more broadly and then jump into a very brief presentation that will give you some insights into what it is that we're doing and how we're addressing the problems that I'll identify in a second. But some of the market trends that are making platforms like Buttonwood so valuable, or at least we believe, is that we're going through a transition, and some would say a tectonic shift, where I would say it's much more gradual. But here's a Gartner slide that they presented in the last 3 months that states that they believe by 2022, we will have a tipping point where organization workloads will have flipped from a third to a third to a third. This is obviously a dramatic shift away from an all on-premise position. And we're working with a broad set of customers at the moment that are leveraging cloud as a tactical solution, leveraging it as a complete destination. So we're seeing a complete spectrum of requirements. But this is really interesting because as we do make the transition to, or strategically move to, a hybrid or multi-cloud world, there are challenges that we have to address. So 451 did a recent survey across 40,000 businesses globally. So quite a compelling study. And I guess one of the things, and it broaches today's subject, is what and how are enterprises feeling about this shift to a hybrid multi-cloud world? And obviously there's an increase in complexity, but there's also great return if we get it well, if we do it well and get it right. But as you can see on the right-hand side, and the topic of conversation today is around cost management. Every organization we walk into, if you talk to the CFO, there's not a lot of confidence that they have control of their cost spend. And it is absolutely one of the major things that everyone's trying to bring under control. So today I wanted to walk you through our experiences. So the cost management challenges, as we've experienced it, are broad and many, and there's not a single strategy or single solution that addresses all of them. But so we've had to kind of understand them. We've had to build multiple features and functions to try and start targeting these services, because ultimately, if we don't get this right, there is an enormous penalty in budget overruns as part of this conversation. So I've kind of grouped them into 4. And I'll go through those very quickly, but often cloud resources, The understanding of cloud is sometimes a little shy of what it needs to be when it comes to actually consuming cloud. We're used to a virtual infrastructure where a VM's a VM. To clean up our environment, we delete the VM. In cloud, every single resource is a consumption-based item. So a VM can be made up of many assets, a VM, an IP, a network, a security group, every external disk. And every one of those items needs to be managed independently. And often we find through lack of understanding, people deleting an asset, say a VM, and they don't clean up the rest of the environment, and they incur, while not often huge costs, they certainly incur the death of 1,000 costs through things like static IPs and often disk volumes. Snapshots are done for the right reasons, particularly for regression and rollback, but often left, and they get lost in the overarching operational complexity that we just have in IT these days. And we don't often know about them until the CFO says, "What on earth are we paying for here?" But we also find in organizations that we're doing a lot of experimentation. So when we start spinning things up, say in a sandpit environment, often they're left running long beyond the business value period. And again, everything that we leave running, unlike what we're used to on premise, incurs a cost. So we need to be very mindful about how we manage those. VM operating profiles. So we do a lot of work with customers around platform services. Not a lot you can do around PaaS offerings. They are a fully managed outcome, but there are a lot of techniques and strategies to try and help contain, I guess, and make savings around VM services themselves. So non-critical VMs are one of the first things we generally find with customers once we do a discovery. There's a lot of non-critical VMs that are operating 24/7. So they're things that we target aggressively because it can have significant savings, up to 65% on those assets that are running in cloud. One of the ones that we've always known, but often have ignored because we had plenty of capacity, was the fact that we were sizing workloads to meet more of a vendor risk profile. If you ever look at the minimum requirements on the back of a data sheet, they're quite aggressive because the vendor doesn't want their software platform, to be, held up, I guess, by low resources. But often they're oversubscribed. So understanding your operational footprint, understanding how and when to right size these services, but it's also become a very contextual issue. We get recommendations that say this service over a 3-month sampling has only operated at 3%. We need to maybe save some money by halving the resources allocated, often ignorant in many ways of the business use case. And we've seen this many times where certain services operate 24/7 but have peak workloads and they need the allocations as is. And by downsizing, we're actually compromising the business outcomes. And we move on. One of the biggest questions that we've had probably in the last 6 months is around Azure hybrid use benefits. It's a benefit that Microsoft provide. If you have software assurance on your virtual machines on premise, you can allocate use rights to a machine at point of creation. But there's a lot of governance that goes with that. You can save a lot of money by doing up to 40% because they're not going to double charge you for your Windows licensing. You get charged just for a Linux-based workload. But one of the hardest challenges our customers are facing is how they manage those use rights. So they still have a 90-day reassignment rule. So if I use a use right in cloud, and I terminate that VM that's associated, I'm not allowed to redeploy that use right for another 90 days. So that's frustrating, particularly for government organizations who are very compliance driven. So understanding their true up position, understanding their compliance position is something that everyone struggled with. And one of the bigger challenges, if I don't apply them when I instantiate the service, I can't retroactively apply license, mobility to SQL or use benefits to VMs. So something, again, a real governance challenge that if we don't do right, we're incurring costs or double costs, and we're very passionate about trying to avoid those things, and ultimately financial governance, which was the big business use case that customers told us before we even started this journey, because cost management is not financial governance. Cost management has an ability to tell me what I've spent, and working with a lot of financial controllers and financial managers, their frustrations abound because organizations are struggling to accurately predict or quote, if you will, cost what a project or what a resource will cost me through life in cloud. So it's something that is very real, and it's something that we've challenged head on. And I'll introduce you to some of those things, because the biggest risk for organizations today is if they don't have financial governance. Gartner has predicted or shown averages of at least 23 to 32% of cost overrun on average. So if you're spending 10 million in cloud, or even a million in cloud, you're looking at $250,000 to $2.5 million of overrun, quite simply because I couldn't govern it. So our job is to ensure that we give you those insights and the control plane to be able to approve those processes in line with a fixed budget and how to manage that through life. So Buttonwood as a platform was developed simply to help operationalize cloud in a very simplistic way, and help govern hybrid and multi-cloud services independent of platform or provider, but without ever losing the value of what those native providers are offering industry, because they are very powerful and should be embraced. So very quickly, before I jump into the more specifics, as a platform, it is a platform of two parts. We have Central, which is our SaaS, highly available SaaS service that is deployed primarily to look at the governance aspects. So it's where we do all our cloud harvesting and cloud billing. It's where we establish all of our financial rules, delegations, budgets, and cost centers. And we're really aggregating public related data. So we're very conscious of the security concerns. We're a Canberra-based business and have been developing this for the last 4.5 years. And we're aware that a lot of organizations are very conscious now of security. So we ensured that the second part to this, the Automate, which is an appliance-driven approach, sits behind your firewall. It allows us to integrate with existing assets for hybrid management, but it also obscures a lot of the actions that we're doing in our hybrid cloud world, such that we've got a stronger sovereign and security position for organizations. Now, it is a very large platform. It's grown organically over the years, and it's too broad a topic, and I often confuse if I try and explain all the features, functions. So today we're really focusing on the governance layer and how we're layering the platform over the top of these multi-cloud environments to secure and provide better cost management. But I'm obviously more than happy if there are discrete questions and requirements or business concerns that people have, to really drill in on specific topics and highlight the richness of the platform, because there has been an awful lot of work done, and I'm very proud with what the team have achieved. Now, as part of the invite, we said 3 things that would help organizations achieve better financial governance in cloud. So what I've laid out here are the 3 main components. Cost management. You need to be able to measure in order to manage. So cost management is a very deep and very rich analytics engine. We're harvesting private and public cloud resources. So we have an ability to take a ongoing position of your on-premise services, as well as public cloud providers such as AWS and Azure, and really give you that deep, rich visualization to help you start to understand and report on that cloud spend. While it's reactive, it's starting to give us the insights to take proactive steps in reducing that growth curve. Then on the other side, we've got hybrid cloud automation, and I'm going to bookend this conversation because these were the 2 key elements that needed to be developed in order to provide financial governance. If I have a look at cost management, as I said, it's about costs that have incurred. It's about harvesting those millions and millions of lines of data and giving you a very clear and concise picture of where you are. Next to that is the cost center and budget position, where we will take specific costs and align them at the business layer so that organizations can report at the cost center with strong alignment and manage business level spend at the budget level, which I'll get onto. Next to that, we have the financial visibility. So what we needed to be able to do to lay a financial governance over a traditional model was to ensure that we could solve the biggest problem that many organizations are facing, and that is, what will something cost me before I move to cloud? This gives organizations much better confidence and clarity about how to go to senior management, ask for budgets, and ensure that those budgets are accurate. We've worked with some agencies that spend up to 3 months on a very simple outcome. But that, in order to achieve that type of visibility and accuracy in quoting, we needed to be able to understand exactly what it was that you were deploying in cloud, which then brings me to the other bookend, which is hybrid cloud automation. So we developed a very sophisticated tool to abstract the complexity in a lot of ways from what is today a very script-centric kind of conversation. We've worked with organizations that have invested millions in this transition, but have then lost the individuals that were writing those scripts and have really struggled to regain that investment. So we're very, focused on democratizing that IP, making sure that if you do have staff churn, that the next person that assumes that position has has the tools to quickly come up to speed with every service that you've consumed, and how to take those services that have been developed and quickly consume or build new offerings for the organization. And I'm going to bookend these in kind of conversation because everything that I said relies for financial governance comes from cost management and the automation architecture. So I'll quickly touch on this, but not belabor it too much. But one of the challenges of moving to a cloud operating model is, at the moment, we're seeing an awful lot of individuals, whether they be developers or cloud adoption teams, working in isolation. One thing about cloud or hybrid cloud, doesn't matter whether I'm just going purely to Azure or I'm building a more complex multi-cloud world, is that everybody within the organization has a role and a responsibility. So where Buttonwood has been focused is to ensure that we understand those roles, as you can see on the page, empower them to perform their roles, independent of another role, but ultimately move the organization forward as one. And one of the key aspects to that was to ensure that the specific function could bring their own tool sets. So we've got a broad set of integrations that allow architects to develop artifacts with Git repositories using ARM or CloudFormation templates, operational teams to align with their data protection or their service management framework, security, who have all of their alerting, monitoring, key management, and even in a hub and spoke worlds, the Jumpbox and Bastion host configurations, script hosts. All of these are individual responsibilities, but seated within the platform and consumed at higher orders without needing to violate the security principles, such as sharing passwords. These are all done through secret management, credential, and RBAC style offerings. And ultimately, in order to deliver the agility, is to be able to give those developers the type of services that they need without really needing to worry about whether or not it's backed up or it's secure, or whether or not the financial team have approved the fundings. They need to be concerted efforts across a team as part of that. So interesting cost management, and I think it's more compelling in demo, so I won't sit too long here, but one of the big things is obviously visualizing what is an incredibly complex environment where a single monthly bill can be millions of line items. But the thing that we need in order to provide a little bit of semblance of normalcy, or normality, I should say, to this is tag management. So the first thing we do in any organization is try and understand their tag frameworks or the taxonomies and really clean that up. So we've created the tool sets at customers' request to say there's a lot of erroneous tags, the ability to fix both reactively and proactively was an essential tool, because if I don't have alignment of my frameworks here, then I can't report accurately. Then the obvious answer was invoices, greater clarity of where my invoices and where my spend is. How can I drill down and quickly understand what those spends are, and what and why are things trending up? And that's the thing I use daily within my own teams to then try and isolate particular projects, or identify the most expensive resources to ask the right questions. And often that relies on me relying on daily activities, so I can really drill down at a very granular level, and also projections and alerts. So I establish a lot of budgets for the team, and then I'll set up an alert for a projection of 80%. I'm not, and I don't have the time to manage on a day-to-day basis everything that occurs. But if I can get exception-based reporting that tells me that this project team is now hitting 80% projected, they may only be $130, dollars, into the budget spend, but at least now I've got that powerful AI engine to tell me that we're going to project out to 80%. That's perfect. But beyond 80%, 120%, I start to need to manage that more proactively. So a really powerful position. Automation as an engine itself is a very large but beautiful beast. It has, that beauty around the drag and drop world. So it takes out a lot of the knowledge of dependencies, as we kind of highlight and demonstrate that as a drag and drop function. You can quickly compose things. I'll show you one blueprint later that, if you were writing an ARM template or a CloudFormation template would take weeks worth of work. We were able to build ours in under an hour and a half, and they're very complex services. But the beauty of the democratization of that is an ability then to look at it and really understand very quickly, even in a non-technical sense, exactly what services I have available and what they will be needed to change or modify moving forward. So environments, plugins, variables, all these assets are just extensions of the platform to give developer freedom to provide operational governance, but also the ability to ultimately publish a self-service catalog that can be consumed by developers through a secure API or via the internal teams. We're working with one organization that wants data modeling, so an ability to surface particular workloads and a self-service capacity to model data on just-in-time basis is really powerful and quite compelling. However, we're here to talk about cost management. So I highlighted a few of the main features here through cloud automation, and migrations are important. So we have built native migration that allows us to model on-premise services, build out the desired end state, and migrate those today to Azure with complete financial governance. So we treat a migration as well as a brownfield, which is on the right, with the same veracity as we do with a traditional deployment. But what we're doing is moving on-premise to cloud under governance, or we're taking existing as it relates to brownfield workloads and bringing them under management and associating all of the assets that belong to that resource and assigning it back into budget positions so that a budget manager or an organization has much better visibility of and understanding of what's been spent. I mentioned as one of the big points where we can save 65%, and this is around idle assets. So in a lot of development environments or non-production environments, there's a lot of workloads that sit and operate 24/7. So migrations, brownfields, or traditional deployments under policy all can be enacted with an hours of operation, and that's very, very flexible. But more importantly, we solve the real business problem here, because IT's kind of been running scripts in the background to try and save money, but it was a challenge to productivity, as business owners would come in on the weekend without the controls needed to start up their independent workloads to perform the tasks they need to meet a deadline. So we've made sure that every single item, every single deployment as a unit can be managed independently. And if you've got the right permissions under an RBAC model, you have the ability to override an hour of operation to increase productivity. Licensing, we mentioned, obviously hybrid use rights, the ability to establish your licensing pools, and then at the environment level, which are kind of production production environment, dev test, if you will, allocate specific rights to those, and we will automate and manage the governance position of that based on a deployment. It means that we're calling the appropriate APIs or running the appropriate PowerShell scripts to identify individual resources and ensure that you're not getting all of the accrued costs that come from double dipping. Classifications, something that's much more of a financial, a governance position for government who want to classify their official versus protected versus secret worlds to meet ISM compliance, and it's all done from a user standpoint. But metered events as well. One of the customers that we worked with said cloud costs are only part of the overall value to the business. We have an awful lot of assets that we've created that cost money. We have software licensing. We have services such as backup that we would like to be able to create metered events that would be layered on top of the framework, if you will, and have that managed at the budget level independent. I am moving because it's quite difficult now talking to a screen instead of talking to individuals. So I apologize if I'm moving quickly, but I've been told I've only got 45 minutes. So I seem to be stuck. I've got a bit of a lag. So the last slide that I wanted to show before I said thank you. So I've just got a little bit of lag. I do apologize. I am now sitting on, okay. And the last one, which is really the financial governance aspects to it. And this has really been developed to create a cost center in alignment with a financial project or a reporting mechanism. But once a CFO has created that cost center alignment, they're able to delegate that ownership, if you will, down to, say, the CIO. The CIO within our system would have a delegate limit, say $1 million, and they would be able to create then a budget of $1 million or $50,000 up to that maximum, obviously, to cater for demands within their business. But once a CIO has created, they want reporting, but they don't want day-to-day management. So within the same delegation framework, you can identify budget managers. Then those budget managers can then be tasked to managing the day-to-day health, if you will, of that budget. We've given them a lot of tools, a lot of controls, if you will, to ensure that they stay within budget. So I'll get into that because it really is a very, very powerful tool set that kind of comes from that financial visibility we get before deployment through reservations, consumers, and policies. And in essence, a reservation is, hey, I want to run this for 6 months. I need $2,000. We take a reservation of $2,000 against the budget, which is a huge gap when it comes to cost management, because while I may have a $50,000 budget, I really have, and this happens all the time, no control about overcommitment. I can have 50 different people spending my money and not really knowing, what position I'm in until I've already spent the money. So by taking a reservation, we avoid overcommits. Now we can manage those reservations through life, through projections and smart AI, but it gives us that granularity and commitment that once I know that I'm at 80 or 90% of my projected reservation position, I can actually close that budget so I'm not incurring any more new workloads. It doesn't affect what's running, but it's a very powerful position. Consumers are important because as a budget manager, I need to authorize individuals who can spend my money. So it's not open to the world. It's only open to those that I have authorized explicitly to spend my money. And if I want to, I can set up policies specific to the budget or even in an individual. So if I may want to say that we're not auto approvers. So that is walk you through the general sense. I want to spend the reality of an engineer myself. What I've got, I'm hoping to share my screen work that I'm working. Okay, so the system is alive. So what I've got here is Central. Now, what I showed earlier was the two sides of the platform, Central being obviously the governance framework. Yes, we do a lot of work around the provisioning of applications. We have federated identity management, say with Azure AD. We can manage users and groups through secure integration with those IDPs. And we also have our own marketplace and API integrations to enable organizations to provision workloads, but more importantly, actually govern the cost of those subscriptions through life. If I jump down into the dashboards, it isn't running pretty slow at the moment. So I'm going to, I don't know why it's running so slow through this shared process, but hopefully you're following along. I seem to have a lag with the system at this point in time. Apologies for the technical difficulties. We didn't sacrifice enough to the demo gods, apparently. What I might do is just stop the sharing and see if I can come back in and share that again. My apologies. It's not the platform, as in Buttonwood, running slow. It's the sharing of the technology. We tested and it worked really well, but now we seem to have technical difficulties. So I apologize. I'm just going to fire that tab back up, which is the way it works, and hopefully be able to jump straight back in. Okay, so see if I can share that tab again. Hopefully have a better result. So what I've got here, as I mentioned, let's see if I can jump into dashboards. So what dashboards are the aggregation of the budgets that I, as an individual, have been delegated to manage. So on behalf of my organization, I'm managing 4 budgets or 4 discrete projects. I have 132,000 under management. I have a current spend of about 20,000 with a projected spend of about 112. So I'm obviously not too concerned because I'm operating within the budget periods that have been defined. You'll see here that each budget has a current spend and projected spend. And often the only thing I'm interested in is when I have a position that's projecting over a reserved reservation. So I can start to manage that even though I'm very early in the cycle to understand through this projection framework exactly what sort of services are being consumed and how I can flatten this curve to see if I can bring this back under management. One of the big assets here, as I mentioned, is the governance framework, our ability to create budgets, cost centers, delegations, and manage SaaS-based subscriptions. But ultimately, what that gives me is an ability to start to manage my budgets at a very granular level. So here's one that I use on a daily basis as it relates to all the demonstrations I do for customers on a day-to-day basis. So here I've been given $35,000 exclusively to this budget. Obviously, not a lot of current spends, but it is projecting now out to over $10,000 based on some of the work that I've done. That will flatten when the modeling starts to even out. But you can see here my budget reserved is only 3%. Down the bottom right here, you can actually see that the trim claim amount is $489, which means the reservations that I've approved, some of those workloads have now been terminated early or have expired, and I can reclaim about $500. There is an expand reclaim amount, and this relates directly to some of the workloads that have expired or have been terminated, but ultimately probably still have some assets associated with them. And this is a really powerful way to start to manage and monitor that. But here I've got consumers that I mentioned before, an ability to assign users to my budgets. If it's not there, they get no right to spend my money. I have policies that I've established for individuals who have certain limits. All consumers, if it's over $100, need approval, $25 for individuals and $50 for others. And then obviously the ongoing reservations that have been approved within my organization, and I can manage those proactively. But one of the things that I'm able to do when my budget reservations are starting to bounce up to the 80s and 90% is I have an ability to close this budget, as I mentioned. So to protect its integrity, I may then want to go and ask business for more money, or I may want to come back and clean up what I've got, or keep it closed in the long run. But the budgets and cost centers are a really valuable business level view. But as we drop down into much more of a cloud center, this is the cost management viewpoint. We've spent a lot of time and energy making sure we can now start to provide that high level view of all of your cloud positions, both in cloud, you see AWS and Azure there, as well as VMware. If you have a large VMware environment, you want to do show back or charge back. And we can start to really understand all of our cloud spend. And what I do as a business owner is I'm looking for these monthly projections and how they're trending up. But I can start to really start to visualize everything from a dashboard level and all the way down to an account-based level. So a lot of the things that I'm doing when I start to see things trend up is I'm really interested in, so my projected invoice or last invoice. So we keep all invoices as part of this as a reconciled event. But often when I'm given a projected invoice, I want to drop into that very specifically and understand in this instance, what I'm spending, how it's been allocated. I've only got one sub account here, which is the basic subscription. All of my resource types, you can see here most of the things that are spun up here are virtual machines, all of my services at the type breakdown. But what I use this a lot for is to understand the resources and the most expensive resources that have occurred in that month. This gives me a great start point to start to ask the questions about how do I control or contain that spend? How do I understand that better? Because, as has been explained to me, understanding your invoices from 3 months ago don't help me control the spend moving forward. But under cost management now, I can start to see what resources are new, how much they're costing me. I can start to manage those as favorites so that I've got that clarity and reporting process now that I can start to come in and understand all of those resources that I've just put in, understand exactly what sort of patterns are happening with that resource, start to drill down into specific costs to understand exactly where my cost frameworks are, and understand all of the details, including discrete charges, any linked resources that are associated, any tags that have been created, and my ability, obviously, to normalize tags as part of this, and really start to manage my cost spend with much greater visibility and clarity. You'll see here in my favorites that I keep quite a few just to understand exactly where that cost spends are with started to spin up SQL data warehousing, which was quite an expensive daily cost. So I wanted to make sure that I could understand everything that was going on. You can even come in here and make notes, both sides of the equation, to track those quite proactively. I also use activity a lot because this gives me the conceptual picture of what my teams are spinning up on a daily basis. You know, on a single day, I can see that a resource has been spun up. It's been assigned to the default cost center. So for every subscription that we bolt into the system, we default that down to a default cost center. However, depending on what the business requirements are, if they're not being tagged under a rule, we can change the cost centers and exactly where those assets need to be reported from an ongoing position. So there's an awful lot of power and flexibility in cloud management. I did want to go through a lot more, but I'm very conscious of time. But one of the great things about the system is giving me clarity of deployments. And I'll jump into the automation because the challenge with trying to manage cost within the context of cloud is relying on tags is only a 60% win ratio. Not every asset can be tagged. So therefore I get a lot of erroneous costs that end up in my default cost center that I can't reconcile. We built automation as part of this whole conversation to ensure that I could get much greater clarity and position on that. And one of those big things was to understand, as I mentioned, what is it that I'm actually spinning up as an organization? And the hardest thing in order to do that is to understand what something costs. So I've got a lot of blueprints that I've created here, or the team has over time. Here's a very complex one in AWS where it's all PaaS offerings. So Azure Scale Group, AWS Scale Groups, I should say. There's a lot of SNS topics, key pairs, placement groups, things that launch templates, things that are very specific to AWS. They're PaaS-based operations, application load balancers that can be configured to meet the desired outcome for my organization. But if I was trying to cost that blueprint, if my organization said, how much would that blueprint cost? It would probably take manually maybe 2 or 3 weeks to try and understand all of the algorithms needed and all the metrics needed to understand the costing frameworks for all of this. And it becomes almost an impossible ask. So what we were able to develop under the context of the framework was what we call a lowest cost conforming bid process. So when I go to deploy something as an end user, I am a consumer of 3 different budgets that I showed you earlier. So I'm only authorized to consume spend across the cost centers that I'm actually authorized. So Buttonwood, I now have policy that determines how long I can actually run something for, and I can now deploy that into cloud at a fully costed position. So as you can see there, under a second, we've actually costed this entire blueprint. It's going to cost me $141 to run this service for the allocated period, which is 30th. We now get a fully costed position, which is almost impossible in a lot of instances. So here you've got your load balancer cost. You've got all of your charges for individual auto scale groups across minimum and maximum positions. You've got all of the estimated cost for your SMTP traffic. So we've got the costing frameworks, and it now gives me a very clear and a very concise picture of $141.15. Now, the beauty of the system is when I go to deploy that, it will go into a pending approval state. Because we had a policy on our, I'm just wondering whether you can see that. Sorry, guys. I'm just going to jump back into the Chrome tab and just show you the workspace and show you that that budget that I just tried to spin something up into. So as a budget manager, a very discrete role, you'll notice now that we've got a pending request for $141.16. If I was to approve that request, I would take that reservation, and the blueprint itself would now start to deploy. So this gives me an incredible granularity of what it is to be able to provide financial governance across an organization. But it also starts to help me with lease periods solve one of the biggest challenges that many organizations are now faced with, and that's through reserved instancing. So I've left that kind of conversation to last because it's a black art. Reserved instances are normally recommended both from AWS and Azure through a sampling that they provide over a 3-month period. That sampling will simply say that this machine's running 24/7, and they recommend that you buy a reserved instance. Reserved instances, though it's a moving feast, generally established of a prepaid event for 12 months or 3 years. Many customers take those recommendations at the administration level to save money and then quickly go out and buy reserved instances. The biggest challenge to that whole conversation is that without business context or without understanding the length of time that that workload will be running, often workloads are terminated shortly after buying a reserved instance, and it no longer is fit for purpose, which means I now need to sell those reserved instances back in the market and manage a completely separate financial process. And then I lose about 20% of that instance that I've purchased. So where Buttonwood has a unique position, as you saw when I was spinning up that workload, in order to get a fully costed position, I need to be able to define how long I want to run something for. So we take the recommendations from Microsoft, who may give you, say, 50 machines that they recommend, and we overlay that position with analytics to tell you that these 5 have been scheduled or have a lease commitment for greater than 12 months, and these are the reserved instances that you should be purchasing. But these 8 have actually been scheduled to run and operate for greater than 3 years, so these are the reserved instances. It's the lease period that we can now overlay through business understanding and contextual relevance over the top of those assets to now avoid a lot of the erroneous and costs of managing reserved instances at a broader position. So there's a lot of things, a lot of challenges that organizations are faced with. But I just quickly want to run through those 4 that I actually had on the floor. So with Central as a governance framework and through the reporting at the account level, we can identify and provide for you a couple of things. The trends of your current workloads. We can report on orphaned disk as well as floating IPs, which are very, very expensive items, and through proactive management start to reclaim a lot of that work. We can provide an hours of operation framework that is part of a policy engine. I didn't show you that. I apologize. It was one of the things that I had to. And using the policy framework, for example, here are my deployments. So I've got, say, a VLAN, which is just a series of servers that are connected to multiple networks. I have an hours of operation. So based on policy at the environment level, which is the governance engine, you can now start to govern exactly when machines start and stop. We can govern the power sequence of exactly when those machines start up to make sure that we've got an operating position at the end of the state. But we can also, in a lot of instances, create a much more granular position where potentially we never restart an instance and we only incur the cost when the end user, who now has access to that at the individual layer, actually starts that service themselves. So we're able to provide hours of operation to save 65%. We're allowed to able to govern Azure rights management that can save you up to 40% on your compute costs. We can start reclaiming a lot of the floating assets that are incurring, or orphaned assets that often is around 10 to 12% of your cloud spend. we're able to, under governance and policy, enforce environmental policies that have a maximum lease duration. So here, a lot of the things I do in development are disabled or terminated after a period of time. That was developed because I left things running, as often is the intent. So there's an awful lot that can be done just to clean up workloads that are no longer being used. And obviously, finally, is being able to, or part of that conversation is giving you much greater clarity on what reserved instances that you need to buy based on the information we have with lease reservations and how long those workloads are operating under. And finally, with strong financial governance, we can avoid, where possible, the overspend of our budget, saving up to 23 to 32% on Gartner's averages, just through proper governance and financial visibility. So there's an awful lot, and I'm sorry I got a bit flustered when I couldn't share my screen and I kind of lost my track. So I apologize if I lost you a little bit on that, but I wanted to kind of cover everything off in a very kind of broad scale and really start to identify and address those key points. Now, it has been going for 51 minutes. I'm a minute over on my own timetable. I was wondering whether or not there are any questions that I could answer for you as part of the process, particularly the financial aspects. I hope I haven't lost you. So one question, okay, that's just come through is this usable if I'm just in Azure or an AWS environment? And the answer is absolutely. So we are a hybrid multi-cloud platform. We work either on premise with AHV, OpenStack, VMware. We're able to create synthetic invoices for showback, chargeback, incorporating into that automation engine. Or we can literally operate natively against AWS or Azure, or at the hybrid world, multi-cloud world, bring all of those together where the real value is to show and contain costs and operational outcomes on a predictable basis. Any other questions? Yeah, one coming through. I'll just wait. Sorry. So the question is, how do I understand my futures? Because one of the biggest challenges understanding that goes back, I guess, to clarifying. Sorry if I skipped over it. One of the big things that I use a lot is projections. I set up a lot of alerts against the budgets that I do create. So at my cost center level, so here's my budgets. If I have a look at the alignment of this, you'll see that I have alerts that have been established. So I've got an alert that comes to me when 50% of my actual budget is being consumed to realize true cost. And then I have an 80% projected budget that gives me the alerts and the daily reports that I need to proactively manage this environment. In Insights, where I use a lot to try and understand my futures, is really understanding the projected spend using the ARIMA modeling framework. And understanding that is the start point that I use to ask the right questions. So here you can see going up 11%. This projected invoice is obviously going to create, an extra $1,000, but that could be $1 million for some of our customers spending a lot. That's the start point. Once I understand, so this was because the team had spun up data warehousing and Synapses as a service. I just drilled down to understand that. So then what I was able to do was establish a cost center rule. And what that did was anything then that hit production, or in this case, the Synapses tag that we had, I added a criteria to move that to a dedicated cost center that I created. So now all of my costs for that specific event is now linked to a specific budget. And here you can see they're obviously playing with the costs of those charges, and they've obviously shut them down under the policy. So I'm not incurring any more. But when you see a single service that's costing you $70 or $80 a day, for me, I want to know about it. And you can see now the projections now come underline, and I feel very comfortable that I now have a better understanding and better confidence about what the team is doing in that regard. One of the things I didn't cover, which is really, really important, was the tag alignments. I've got a couple of minutes. As I mentioned before, a lot of cost management and a lot of rules are used to align spend today directly back into the cost center and budget layer. But the biggest challenge customers have is they don't understand across a broad organization what tags are being used. So here, for example, I've got an application tag. I've got 4 references of that. I've got test, harvester, synapsis, and all development work. I may want to be able to change or modify. So maybe test was an erroneous position, and that really should have been development. I can now modify that tag in our system, and it will automatically adjust all of the references and the reporting frameworks to normalize that. I can now take that from a reactive position of what is to then come back into an account, say for my production, and add in a tag rule. So if I had an erroneous prod versus production as an example, I may come in here and add a rule that literally states if my prod name is environment and it equals prod, please change that name to production on ingest of the actual data itself. So I'm normalizing that data so that I got a much more clear taxonomy that I can now start reporting and managing all of my resources on a much more accurate position. So there's a lot of little functions that can be used to enable us to start cleaning up that data, but also for reporting. A lot of customers, this is something the customers obviously asked for, was an ability to also export data out of the system into third-party systems such as JSON format or comma delimited. You'll see one shortly bubble up where we're going to push directly into Power BI so that we can take this wealth of information and data that we've ingested, we've normalized, we've tagged and targeted to the appropriate business layer, but now the business wants to spin it in the data warehouse or in a Power BI position. So there is a lot of capabilities, functionalities, and automation techniques, I guess you would say, to start to help qualify a lot of those services. Just saying that this front door that I spun up in Azure, you can see all of the assets here, every asset that was spun up. As we start to harvest that data, you'll start to see the actual specific information and cost data start to compile. But one of the things, as I mentioned before, when you spin up a blueprint these days, it's not a single asset. So here you can see there's an awful lot of assets. If I go into the console and just delete a web app or a security group, I'm not cleaning everything up in context and get those orphaned assets. So it gives me great visibility and clarity at a deployment level now of every resource that's now been spun up as part of an organization. And now the drill through is really giving me a lot of value in what it is we do. So I'm going to leave it there. I know I've run out of time. I apologize, as it is a very difficult thing to present to myself. I find that I start to waffle because I get no feedback, but I hope I haven't lost you. I hope I've intrigued you with what is, I think, a very exciting platform developed by very, very smart people. I'm not one of those smart people, but I'm very proud to represent them in these type of forums. And, as an Australian product and a sovereign service, I hope that people, are favourable to supporting local industry. But from that, I just wanted to say thank you very much for everything that you've done today, your time. I know it's very valuable, and hopefully, waffle aside, that we've touched on a few pain points that you're suffering in your organisation, and perhaps we're able to engage and help you on that journey. So thank you very much, and I hope you have a lovely day, and I hope your day is as beautiful as it is here in Canberra. All the very best, and stay safe.